Right. Good morning, whoever may be watching this, America, around the world, whoever. I want to go and make a video detailing why Kamala Harris lost because I jump on Twitter today and I see a bunch of people, mainly liberals, freaking out that Kamala Harris lost and saying the exact same shit that I thought in 2016 when Hillary Clinton lost, because I'll never forget that night. For sure. But this election, I really don't give a fuck about. I have bigger fish to fry, but everyone seems to be clueless as to why Kamala lost. They truly do. So I want to go ahead and make a video detailing why she lost and what Trump did and what Kamala didn't, or what Kamala did and what Trump didn't, okay? This video, I am not riffraffing off my head. This is not improv. I have thought about this, but I'm bad at thinking and then speaking if I'm not speaking to someone. And this camera is a mechanical object, right? It's not a person. So I wrote a script for myself, like a rough script, and I am going to be reading off of that. So I apologize if it seems informal and not genuine. This is genuine. I just finished. I wrote this for like 45 minutes to an hour, and now I am reciting it, and I'm going to be like, improving and whatnot. Okay. I have, how many reasons do I have right here? I have four reasons and then a closing paragraph as to why Kamala Harris lost. Just flipping my phone. Why Kamala Harris lost. Okay. Reason number one. Kamala Harris lost because she was not speaking to the majority of undecided voters who were young men, particularly white men, but really young men in general. She was not speaking to them. She spoke. When Kamala Harris spoke, she would speak in mediums that us young men, we were not going to and we were not using. Where did she speak? She spoke on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, and she spoke at rallies and other mainstream media news outlets, right? Young men, us, we're not there. What are the most important things in our lives? Not mainstream media outlets and all that stuff like Kamala Harris rallies and Trump rallies, right? That's not important in our lives. What's important in our lives? It is music, video games, sports, podcasts, and memes. Those are the most important things, right? Music, video games, sports, podcasts, and memes. 5 things. Those are the most important things to us because those are the things that we go to pretty much every day or every chance that we're able to, yeah? Trump, when he was running, he hit pretty damn hard everywhere except music and video games, right? Like, I'm sorry, but conservatives, they just make bad music, right? Republicans make bad music. For sure, for the most part, right? They just make bad music. And Trump isn't really so in tune with video games as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe he was one of those people that, propagated the whole video games cause violence, or maybe it was the Dems. It was everyone. Everyone thinks video games cause real violence, which is absolutely insane. But Trump hit really hard on memes, sports, and podcasts. That's where he hit really hard. And that's where the majority of not only young men, young undecided male voters are, but that's the majority of where male undecided voters are, period. Because they don't care about anything else because they're trying to live their life and provide either for themselves or for their family and just have fun. That's what their focus is, right? The Trump memes, I'll say the Trump memes for this whole election cycle for the last year to year and a half. Every single time I seen a Trump meme, I would come up to my fiance, not every time, but every couple of times I'd see a real funny Trump meme. I show it to my fiance and I'm like, man, I miss Trump. Not because I like him. It's because he was so funny. It was like every day was like Christmas. It was like, what funny thing is going to happen today, right? Opening up Twitter, what funny thing is Trump going to say today? And I absolutely loved it. And this election cycle was no different. The memes, top tier, hilarious, loved everything, loved all of his moaning and groaning he would do when he would imitate women lifting weights. That was some of the funniest shit I've ever seen. So the memes were on point, right? Which is actually a big buff because the majority of young people and young male undecided voters, they're seeing those memes. And that's like, oh, Trump's really funny, right? And that's in their brain. Boom, Trump in the brain already. what was that? What was another thing? Donald. Oh, with the sports, Donald loves the UFC and has loved fighting for many years. I mean, you go and watch a couple interviews and podcasts he's done. He says, "Oh, I've loved the UFC forever." Boxing, he used to really like boxing, but then it was too dangerous. But now he just watches the UFC and he loves the UFC. He's always at UFC events taking pictures with all of young men's favorite influencers, whether or not you like them or you think they're funny because they're absolutely stupid, right? Just gonna throw this out there. Aiden Ross, right? Aiden makes himself look like a damn fool. And if I remember correctly, he met Trump at the one UFC event, which is like, okay, you know, that has already gets into their world as well. Yeah. Trump has loved fighting and sports so much, he's gotten the most famous WWE wrestlers of all time to co-sign him, like Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, Kane. I guarantee you could even throw Shawn Michaels in there. But for sure, he got the co-sign by Undertaker, Hogan, and Kane. And that's massive. And what did he do after he got co-signed by Undertaker and Kane? He went on their podcast, the 6 Feet Under with Mark Calloway podcast, right? Which is massive, right? So now he's in the wrestling world too. Trump is fucking everywhere. Trump and Vance, and this goes to the podcast bit, right? Great segue. Trump and Vance have appeared on podcasts that the majority of undecided young men listen to / watch. Trump was on the Nelk Boys podcast, Lex Friedman's podcast, Andrew Schultz's podcast, Theo Von's podcast, and Joe Rogan's podcast. There is no shot that Trump was going to lose if he was speaking to the largest undecided voter base, right? So Trump had his like hands everywhere, right? Like he had his hands in like the young, like red pill, like Sigma podcast, right? With fucking the Nelk Boys, right? So he's in there with like, you know, the whole like, you know, crazy Twitch kick streamer like culture. He's in there, right? And then he goes on Andrew Schultz and Theo Von's podcast, right? Two of the most popular comedians amongst young men and undecided voters, right? Young men, young male undecided voters, and male undecided voters generally watch Andrew Schultz podcast and Theo Von's podcast, right? And there's my cat. Lex Friedman's podcast is a podcast for a lot of people to go to listen to a little bit of a more like analytical style podcast, which a lot of young men like to do if they try to think that they're intelligent or like grow their intelligence or whatnot, right? It's like, oh, you know, I want to be smart. I want to watch something that captivates me a little bit. I'll go watch Lex Friedman, right? No shame no shade / shame towards Lex Friedman. All I'm saying is, you know, I feel like a lot of young men that go to Lex Friedman, they try to be smarter, but getting smarter by listening to some podcasts, it just doesn't work. So it's kind of insane. Nevertheless, though, he was on Joe Rogan. Like, what more needs to be said about Trump being on Joe Rogan? Trump on Joe Rogan's podcast for 3 hours, and I think Trump was actually late by 2 hours to one of his events because he knew the podcast was more important than anything else, right? So doing all these podcasts, especially Joe Rogan's podcast, pushed him 10 years ahead of Kamala Harris, just miles ahead of her. She was never going to catch up. She was never going to catch up at all. Where was Kamala Harris, though? Besides her rallies, she spoke on 60 Minutes, did a podcast with Anderson Cooper, and utilized established institutions to get her message out there to undecided voters. But the undecided voters she reached were people in their 30s and 50s. Who in the world, like, there are way more undecided voters in between the ages of 18 to 50 that are men than those, like, you know, couple 100,000, maybe like 2 million, if that. I'll say couple 100,000, right? There are more male undecided voters than there are that Trump reached, right? Trump reached more male undecided voters than Kamala reached undecided voters from their 30s and beyond, right? It is just a simple fact of the day, right? It's just very simple. So that's one reason Kamala lost, because she was speaking to one, she wasn't speaking to the largest undecided voter base, right? And two, she wasn't interacting with the youth and like men and just people in ways that like they normally would consume the content in, right? We all consume content. Kamala Harris speaking at rallies, now we just see like rally clips on TikTok of her being embarrassing and shit, right? But Trump's now on the Nelk Boys podcast. It's like, oh, okay, you know, I guess it's a little bit legitimate. But then when that last podcast appearance happened and he's on Joe Rogan, it was, okay, I'm voting for this guy, right? Every young man, sorry, my cat, every young man decided to go and vote for Trump after that Rogan podcast. And let's go ahead and talk about endorsements. I already said Trump was endorsed by Hulk Hogan, Undertaker, and Kane, right? Who else was Trump endorsed by? Everyone knows that Trump's been endorsed by Kid Rock. Who else could you say that endorsed Trump? You got Dana White, obviously. Joe Rogan, I think a day or two ago, I think 2 or 3 days ago actually, went out and formally endorsed Trump on the podcast with Elon Musk. Yeah. Also Trump had Elon Musk, right? Trump had an Elon Musk endorsement. Who else? I asked ChatGPT for a list of who endorsed Trump. You had Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris endorsed Trump. So you have a lot of heavy hitters coming in and endorsing Donald Trump. Oh, you got the guy from Dave from Pawn Stars, I think is his name, right? So you got all these heavy hitters endorsing Trump, right? And Kamala had some heavy hitters too, but who cares about them, right? Kamala got Megan Thee Stallion. Who cares about Megan Thee Stallion, right? Kamala got Beyonce. Who cares about Beyonce, right? Kamala got, she pretty much just got every single woman in the world to endorse her. Oh, Taylor Swift, big one, right? So Kamala Harris got a lot of celebrities and famous musicians to endorse her. But here's what I'll say. Kamala, for 90% of the way, had only women endorsing her that undecided voters just do not care about. They do not care about any of these, right? Especially Beyonce. Beyonce was supposed to be like an earth-shattering endorsement, but she wasn't an earth-shattering endorsement because why? All the Diddy stuff coming out. Jay-Z was good friends with Diddy. Who's Jay-Z married to? Beyonce. Remember the whole TikTok thing about like Beyonce doing all this, right? It just wasn't a good look for Kamala Harris, right? All her endorsements were absolutely shit. No one gave a fuck about them because why would anyone give a fuck about them? And then Trump has all these heavy hitters, all these entertainers that everyone loves. And everyone has found funny at one point or another. Kamala has people where I don't really like them, right? The whole Megan Thee Stallion thing, right? When a lot of people think about Megan Thee Stallion, they think about Tory Lanez, or they think about like me personally. I'll think about like, oh, how the fuck did Thought Shit by Megan Thee Stallion get nominated for a Grammy? That song's fucking trash. Sure, that low end hits hard, but that song is trash. What the fuck? No one cared about anyone that endorsed Kamala Harris. No one did. Eminem endorsed Kamala Harris. Major endorsement. On the flip side, anyone could be like, oh, his music's been trash. Why do I care, right? I would disagree with his last album. But, you know, there is that. The cat's meowing at the door. The veil. Something with Kamala Harris was the veil. What? Jeez. The veil. Everyone saw through Kamala's veil the moment she announced she was running. She tried so hard this whole cycle to be relatable that she became unrelatable. The whole, I rode a yellow school bus to school, anyone else ride a yellow school bus to school? And the constant talking about, oh, I was raised in a middle-class family. It was just super annoying. It was like a burning roller coaster coming downhill from the sky. everyone needs to evacuate and get away because it's going to really hurt when it crashes. Kamala's veil was so thin, it made tissue paper look like a book. Harry Potter, Order of the Phoenix, should I be, asked to bring up how thick it was, right? Kamala's veil was just thinner than tissue paper. Trump's veil, on the other hand, was rock solid. Not because Trump is a rock solid guy, right? Let's not get that wrong. Let's just not be crazy. Trump is not a rock solid guy. But Trump's campaign ran on what I call a right here and right now mindset. He didn't really campaign on what he did all those years ago. Instead, it was like this. Trump said, "Do you guys like the country right now?" And we said, "No." And so he ran on the trail of how shit the country has been for the last 4 years under Biden and pretty much proposed ideas that would put money back in our pockets. And I say ideas because we have no clue how all of his economic policies will work because he hasn't said how they'll work in a coherent way. But when you tell a country of poor, disaffected people with the largest wealth disparity in the last few hundred years that they'll be able to afford things again, you got them under your thumb. Most people voted for him because under him, things were a lot more affordable and gas was $1 less than it is now. To be fair, the pandemic hit the nation pretty damn hard, I would say. The pandemic hit pretty hard. So yeah, the country was gonna get destroyed either way. Trump or Biden was still in. Regardless though, Trump was saying that the citizens will have more money put directly back in their pockets, while Kamala has said that we'll have more government programs that will help you pay for stuff, right? Trump was saying, we won't have government programs that are going to help you pay for everything. We are going to put that money back in your pocket, right? That's what Trump was doing. Kamala was saying something that's totally different. And that's pretty much, for the most part, the difference between Democrat and Republican. For the most part, that's really it. Another reason, and I would say, for me, it's the final reason. I could think of a few more reasons why Kamala Harris lost. The last one, though, I'll say, is the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party has been terrible for the last... Gotta stop shaking the camera. The Democratic Party has been terrible for the last 8 years since they booted Bernie out of the presidential race twice. Twice they booted Bernie out of the presidential race. When Trump ran in 2016, he was the most divisive candidate since... maybe anyone else that's older than me can think of a more divisive candidate, but Trump was the most divisive candidate since Abe Lincoln, in my opinion. Trump was bold, reckless, and was an out-of-control fire. What did the Democratic Party do to combat an out-of-control fire? Put Hillary as the candidate. Hillary was nowhere near as bold and untamed as Trump, so his flames put out her water. Then Trump got voted out in 2020, but they put Biden as the candidate. Gotta be real. It was 4 years too late for Biden to run, but the DNC booted Bernie again in 2020. The Democratic Party booted Bernie Sanders out of the race 2 times in a row, right? Bernie was the only Democrat that would have beaten Trump in the polls. In my opinion, Bernie would have smoked Trump in the polls hard. Trump would have been left in the dust. Genuinely, I believe that's how strong of a candidate Bernie was. He would have just left Trump in the dust, okay? Bernie was just as radical as Trump in 2016 and 2020. And Bernie spoke to young disaffected men better than Trump because he gave legitimate solutions to all their issues. But time and time again, he got snubbed to put a more moderate candidate in place. This go around, though, Trump toned down the flames but was still bombastic. And Joe drops out, so they make Kamala the nominee because she can just get all of Joe's campaign funds. It wasn't because she was our only choice. She was just cheaper for the Democratic Party and more recognizable than putting an actual heavy hitter at bat that isn't as well known. Nobody liked her when she ran in 2020, and nobody liked her for the last 4 years. So the Democratic Party is hamstringing themselves because they don't want to take a chance and put people up for election that do an actual good job. They're on the safe side of inoffensive and bland as opposed to taking a risk and putting a genuinely good person up for election. Okay, those are the reasons why Kamala lost. I for sure missed a ton more, but that was all I wanted to say. And this is the paragraph. The people that are upset on the internet are kind of baffling me because we all knew she wouldn't win since she got put in the spot. Social issues do not matter when regular citizens that Kamala is advocating for cannot afford to live right. If a trans person cannot afford their hormones, housing, or food, but is overly comforted by the current Democratic Party that people are now legally required to use their preferred pronouns, there is an issue, right? So if trans people and LGBT people, instant vote for Kamala, right? Because I'll still be able to be trans. I will still, get my gender affirming care, surgery, hormones, whatever it may be. I will still get that, right? That was the reason they voted for Kamala. But at the same time, if you are a trans person, but you cannot afford your hormones or your housing, if you can't afford one of those integral things, hormones, housing, food, if you can't afford one of those integral things, but you're being comforted by the Democratic Party saying, oh, no, don't worry. We are going to legislate that everyone has to call you by your preferred pronoun. Even if they don't know you, they have to call you by your preferred pronoun, right? That would be, kind of like, hey, this person can't afford to live, and under you guys, they still can't afford to live. But I guess they're comforted because now everyone has to call them by their preferred pronoun, right? So that's kind of like an opiate, right? Karl Marx says Christianity is, or religion, or maybe it's one or the other. Religion or Christianity is the opiate of the masses, right? An opiate for LGBTQ people, LGBTQIA plus people, right? The opiate for them is being coddled and being reaffirmed of everything they think and believe, right? But if they can't afford to live, just let them live, let them afford it, then it's all really for nothing in my mind. If Kamala ran more on policy that isn't simply abortion and how bad Trump is, maybe she would have had a chance. A lot of people are realizing that financial freedom is the only kind of freedom we can have as citizens. Even if Kamala had much better economic policies than Trump, she ran mostly on identity politics, whereas Donald ran on money and ending wars. Trump, at first glance, sounds 100 times better than sending money to Ukraine to fight a losing war and sending money to Israel to bomb Palestinians more and more. That's all. Thanks for listening. This was just I just wanted to get this out. Yeah. I'll see you next time, I guess. Peace.